get some help with this. Let's dork out to the NFL draft. Generally, I'm opposed to this, but Pat's going to draft a quarterback. Not like we got anything else to do. So we're going to dork out to the NFL draft this year. Screw it. Let's bring in Phil Perry, NBC Sports Boston. Not that he's a dork, but he's pretty good with the draft. He joins us on the Volkswagen Dealers Expert Hotline. How you doing, Phil?
I'm doing great. You know I love to dork out on this, Mike, so I'm happy to help.
It's okay. I'm a sports dork, too. It's just not my the draft just ain't my area of dorkdom. But anyway, you tell me, Phil, you think that the move yesterday signals they're drafting a quarterback or signing a quarterback or what?
I think the move to get rid of Kessler just frees up a little bit of cap space. It's really not even that much, but they're so up against it that I think they know, okay, if we want to draft somebody, there's actually a relatively deep class that goes into the third round where we have a bunch of picks, and we can maybe add somebody to the mix here who will give us just as much in 2020 as Cody Kessler would. And in the meantime, we can free up a little bit of cash. That's what I thought when I saw that move yesterday.
You think that was a cap move, isn't it? I mean, don't they? And again, this gets so dorky, but isn't it? Aren't they on the thing where it's the top 51? It doesn't matter anyway. They cut someone for $600,000, and the next guy who makes $600,000 just comes on the books. I didn't think it netted them anything.
I think they actually pick up a couple $100,000, Mike. Which, when you're $1 million under, it might help at some point. I mean, they have to just figure out how to clear as much space as humanly possible. So I didn't take it as we have a move that is imminent here, that they're bringing in a veteran. I do think they look at the draft, though, and they see a handful of guys that are going to be there. Like I said, bottom of the third, into the fourth, maybe even day three guys that they look at and they say, okay, we know what Kessler is. If we really wanted to bring him back in a month or two, we probably could do it. They lost him last year and brought him back. Then, it just frees up that roster spot. It frees up a tiny bit of money. And it just allows you to look at this quarterback class and say, okay, who do we want to be our number 3?
Okay, Phil, if that's what you're looking at, third round, fourth round, give me some guys that you like, that you think they might like.
So the one guy that a lot of people know the name and who will be available where they have that little cluster of picks at the bottom of the third is Jalen Hurts out of Oklahoma. And it feels like he's been a riser since the combine, really. I think he just met with a lot of teams and impressed them, from what I understand, with his football IQ and how he just handles himself in the room and sort of has a presence about him. He won a ton of games in college between Alabama and Oklahoma. Obviously, he lost his job to Tua Tagovailoa, but I think the way he handled that situation actually impressed a lot of people. And Tagovailoa is a more talented guy. There's no doubt right now, at least as a passer. But when you look at the character stuff, the makeup stuff, and the athleticism that Hurts has, and would sort of just add that element to whatever offense he goes into, I think there is a lot of value there. And I think he's developing as a passer. He went from Alabama to Oklahoma, where obviously they just love to throw it around the lot, and they have a pretty complex passing scheme there, even though the defenses they face aren't great. So I think he showed enough improvement last year that people are looking at him now and saying, okay, his best football as a passer is still ahead of him. Plus, he's got all of this running ability that we could add. Plus, we're going to add him to the room, and he's going to be a net positive as far as what we're looking to bring in terms of character.
Mazz, you got a thought?
So, Phil, do you eliminate the possibility that they could take a quarterback in the first round? Because I know that a lot of people, myself included, do not want them to do that. And what do you specifically think of the Hurts idea?
I like the Hurts idea because of where you would get him, and because I think it's competition. I think it's you're throwing another dart at the board, and you're just taking a chance. The first-round idea I don't love, because I think if you really want to evaluate Jarrett Stidham, you have to try to surround him with something. That's why I also would hate the idea of them trading Julian Edelman if that ever came to be. But I think you need to draft somebody in the first round that'll at least help the situation for Stidham. Again, if you want to get a good look at him. If you want to tank, which I don't think they're doing, but if you want to tank, then go ahead and tank the thing. But I would add a piece that will help them offensively that's not a quarterback in the first round. If they did want to go into the first, because they look at this group, and there's really a top 4, and it's Burrow, Tagovailoa, Herbert, and Jordan Love from Utah State. If they see Herbert or Love slide a little bit, and I think that's definitely possible, maybe they look at it and say, okay, here's our opportunity to get a guy who in another year might be a top 10 type of talent, but he's sliding, and maybe they don't get all the way to 23, but maybe for the Patriots they start to slide, and you can creep up to 17, 18, and add a piece.
Phil Perry, NBC Sports Boston. If you were the GM, do you like Love? Do you like Herbert? Would you take them in that range, 23?
I wouldn't. It would be a little bit too rich for me, but I do love Love. I mean, like the idea of moving your quarterback position into 2020 and beyond with the skill set, the requisite skill set to succeed in the NFL. I think he has it. When you talk about somebody who is athletic enough to move around the pocket, buy himself time, and make throws to any area of the field, you know, Patrick Mahomes is a name that gets thrown around a lot with Love, and I don't think that's fair because Mahomes had a much better final season at Texas Tech than Love did last year at Utah State. But that's the type of skill set generally you're talking about. Somebody who is not Lamar Jackson in terms of his ability to pick up yards with his legs, but can escape that first rusher, throw from off-platform, quote-unquote, off-platform, throw deep down the field, throw accurate to the short area too. I mean, the arm talent is tremendous. You watch some of these throws, and you just sort of squeal. If you're a football fan, you look at some of these, and you're saying, how is this guy putting the football in these places? He had a lot of deficiencies when it came to the talent around him last year, and so the numbers were horrible. But if you look at his 2018, if you're the Patriots, you say, okay, if he's there at 23, if we're getting that guy that we saw in 2018, that might be the guy moving forward.
So, Phil, when you
squeal, you actually like squeal? Like, what does that sound like when you squeal?
Yeah, like, you know, you just get really excited. Like, you know.
I hear you. Yes. Yeah, I know. Draft nerd like squealing.
Yeah, like you see like a giant tub of hand sanitizer, like same thing.
Yeah,
exactly.
I don't squeal. But when you describe that kind of quarterback, Phil, who's, you know, the mobility factor, I think that's the kind of guy McDaniels wants. It feels to me like McDaniels wants a guy that can move around. What kind of input do you think he's going to have in this thing?
I think he'll have significant input, and I think there are two schools of thought when it comes to just what's important at that position moving forward, because a lot of guys will tell you, listen, quarterbacks are just so inconsistent across the board, across multiple years. You can look at it. Guys are just plain and simple inconsistent. You can't predict how they're going to perform under pressure, right? Under pressure, no two snaps are the same. It's really hard to use how a guy performs under pressure, meaning, you know, not the situation of the game, but when there's a guy in his face, how they handle those situations is very hard to predict from snap to snap and from year to year. So some guys will look at it and say, tell me how a guy performs when the situation around him is perfect, because that is repeatable. And if we can protect our guy and if our receivers can get open and he can execute in those situations, that's what we want to know, because it's our job to surround him with talent at receiver, at tight end, on the line to help him succeed. Under pressure, it's great if he can succeed, but odds are he's not going to be able to succeed next year. And if he's good if he's not good this year, he might be good next year. So there are two schools of thought saying where, okay, number one, you might not care about how mobile a guy is because you just want to see him perform in those perfect scenarios. I think more and more, and from people that I've spoken to this offseason, people much smarter than me, they're starting to add that athleticism portion of it, Tony, to your point, as a more significant piece. Pressure is inevitable in today's game because the defensive linemen are so fast, so athletic, the schemes are more complex. You're going to have to be able to make the first guy miss. And so I think, like I heard you guys earlier talking about that Bill Belichick scouting report on the quarterback position. One thing you didn't really see in there was athleticism, mobility. I think if you ask Bill Belichick or Josh McDaniels today, they would include that portion into that type of scouting report, that type of write-up in terms of what you want at that spot. You have to be somewhat athletic to make that first guy miss and then make a throw. And I think somebody like Jarrett Stidham has enough athleticism to do that. I don't think you have to be Lamar Jackson to fit that mold. But I think you do need somewhat of an athlete. I think McDaniels would be excited to have a guy like that.
Phil Perry, NBC Sports Boston. Be honest. What did you think of Jarrett Stidham coming into the draft last year? Is that someone that you talked about, liked, didn't like? And if I could dial you back to a year and say Jarrett Stidham was going to be the Patriots starting quarterback in 2020, how would you feel about that? What would you say?
I did like him last year, and just speaking to a lot of people leading up to the draft, there really was no question about his talent, right? Even big-time draft media guys, Daniel Jeremiah, NFL Network, Jim Nagy is a former Patriots scout who runs the Senior Bowl now. They would tell you the arm talent that Stidham had last year was just as good as anybody in the class. The question is, when he was under pressure, when the bullets were live, how did he perform? And it did not go well at Auburn in his last year at Auburn. But the year before, he actually had a very good year, and he was projected to be a first-round pick after his first year at Auburn. But things fell apart. So the next season, the coaching wasn't as good. He lost a bunch of guys. Offensive line, Kerryon Johnson was a big part of that offense. Lost him too. So there were people who were looking at Stidham and saying, this is a talented player. The situation was horrible. And that's the reason he falls to the fourth round. And so it's not necessarily hindsight to say, hindsight being 2020 to say, oh, this guy's not a typical fourth rounder, because I really don't think he is. And so if you had told me a year ago that he was going to be the Patriots starter in 2021, I would have said he must have really impressed some people in his first year, because the talent is there. And we know physically that he can do a lot of different things on the football field that not many people can do. But he would have had to impress people in practice, in games, in terms of how he dealt with pressure and how he dealt with guys actually coming at him, because I think the previous year at Auburn, it was set up pretty well for him to succeed, and he did. So now, you listen, you look at it, and if he's the guy moving forward, and I think he's going to be, I think it's a good situation for them, because if you strike rich, if you find a guy who has talent and can be the starter, and he's on a rookie salary, like, you found gold in today's NFL. Look at all these teams that have built around young, cheap quarterbacks, and how they've built their teams, and how they've built, 2, 3, 4 year runs around these guys. If he sucks next year and he was your starter in 2020, then I think you have a real crack at the best guys in next year's draft. So I think that's probably the best way to proceed if you're the Patriots.
Okay, Phil, final question. Who do you have the Patriots taking at 23 in your latest mock draft?
Our latest mock, I haven't taken an offensive lineman, believe it or not. Trading down and taking an offensive lineman. It's the sexiest mock draft you could have ever come up with. I think because at this point, if you're the Patriots, are you really trying to win a Super Bowl now, or are you trying to build a young core that can carry you into whatever this next iteration of this franchise and this roster and this team is? I think you want to just try to add as many potential cornerstone guys as humanly possible. There's a really deep offensive tackle draft. There could be 5 or 6 guys that go in the first round. And so rather than, say, try to draft the next tight end, the best guy's probably Cole Kmet this year, but he's probably somebody who should be taken in the second or the third round, not the first. Instead of doing that and reaching, I'd rather take the offensive tackle who has the opportunity to be a franchise guy. So I had them taking Houston's Josh Jones, who, again, is one of these 5 or 6 guys who could end up going in the first round. He's a good athlete. He's blocked in a lot of different style run scheme plays, which the Patriots like to use, gap schemes, zone schemes. He's really effective there. He only allowed 4 pressures all of last season. He was a 4-year starter, had a bunch of coaches at Houston that didn't really know what they were doing, so it feels like he's still pretty raw, even though he was a 4-year starter. So maybe his best football is ahead of him. So I really like him as a prospect. That's who I had them taking at 23.
Phil, thanks for taking the time. We appreciate it.
All right, guys.